All the critical safety positions like air traffic controllers and inspectors, all of those positions have been protected. No one's been fired. Actually, we're hiring into those spaces. So 352 cuts is 0.8% of the workforce. Incredibly small.
Will there be future rounds of cuts?
There could be. I'm not sure at the FAA, but I think across government.
Could be. Not sure. Hi, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. The Trump administration will swear up and down everything is fine. There's nothing to see here. But ask the people who actually are responsible for the work of keeping our planes in the air safely. Well, a number of them now suggest that flying may actually be less safe today than it was even 1 week ago. A Rolling Stone source called it a pointless bloodbath, what Donald Trump and Elon Musk did to the Federal Aviation Administration. Hundreds of people fired amid a staffing crisis mere weeks after the nation's deadliest aviation disaster since the year 2001, when an American Airlines passenger plane and an Army helicopter collided near D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. You just saw that individual. He's the Transportation Secretary. His name's Sean Duffy, and he insisted in that interview that none of the nearly 400 people who've been purged from the FAA were critical safety personnel. Elon Musk says the same thing, but a brand new investigation from Politico suggests that the firings did indeed include employees who play important roles in the safety of air travel. Quote, more than 130 of the eliminated workers held jobs that directly or indirectly support the air traffic controllers, facilities, and technologies that the FAA uses to keep planes and their passengers safe. That's according to the union that represents them, the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists. That alone creates reason for concern about the impact of the cuts, people familiar with the termination said, even if the initial firing spared the air traffic controllers themselves. But beyond the question of how safe we are is the question of how safe people feel. Polling conducted earlier this month registered a slight, albeit detectable dip in confidence among Americans, a 7% decline year over year in adults calling plane travel safe, and a related 8% bump in people calling it, quote, unsafe. We should note the context. The poll was conducted after the awful plane helicopter collision in D.C. when 67 people died. But it was conducted before the dramatic rough landing and rolling over of a Minneapolis to Toronto flight we covered during these hours last week. And yet firings at the FAA, a shot to confidence in air travel, which will affect everything. But at least they took care of DEI. That's where we start this hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends. Former FAA and NTSB investigator Jeff Guzzetti's here. Also joining us, Politico aviation reporter Oriana Pawlyk. She's bylined on the reporting we read from. And with me at the table, professor at Columbia University, Democratic Strategist Basil Smikle is here. Oriana, take me through the reporting.
Yeah, so what we know right now is that these folks who have been let go, who are on a probationary status, these were people who were in miscellaneous jobs that were essentially still the backbone of air traffic controllers and the information that they receive daily. We see people who do charting. They create maps for pilots that they have to read every single day as they transit these skies. And, you know, letting these people go ultimately still has ripple effects on how air traffic controllers do their job. So just because the title safety isn't in, you know, their job description, they still play a role in the overall safety of air travel at the end of the day.
Let me read from the reporting that gets at this. One of the people let go last week worked as an aeronautical information specialist, a member of a team of 12 just outside of Washington, whose job is to create air maps or highways in the sky, the pre-planned routes that pilots and controllers use to guide airplanes. Quote, air traffic controllers cannot do their work without us, the former employee said in an interview Wednesday. The employee, who spoke anonymously to discuss the recent firing candidly, said they believe the administration did not understand how essential these jobs are for safety, but that instead the workers were, quote, targeted just as a senseless line item on an Excel sheet. Quote, to put it frankly, without our team, pilots would quite literally be flying blind, the former employee said. I'd like to say, how did this happen? But I think we're all watching in real time how it's happening. Is there a sense that if people feeling unsafe to fly is as calamitous both for the industry and tourism and business travel and everything else, almost like a COVID-adjacent economic impact. Is there a sense that anyone in the administration is listening to those concerns?
I think it's going to be a couple weeks until we see those ripple effects that I just talked about. I mean, I spoke to that very employee who gave me those quotes, and, you know, they had said that because they are sounding the alarm on what's going to happen if folks don't rectify this issue, that being the Trump administration. Ultimately, this employee was hoping to see that her team would be reinstated, that they would move forward in getting some of these jobs back. And that is ultimately what the administration is going to decide. And we've seen them make that decision before in hastily hiring back some employees. Now, whether or not more cuts are on the way, though, and who is doing these cuts? You know, you mentioned Elon Musk and DOGE, and, you know, whether or not that's going to have any other detrimental effects. They're just going to continue to hack at this until they feel satisfied, and whether or not, you know, the safety of the system is going to be put to the test. It's already put to the test. We saw the DCA crash, of course, and the NTSB is still investigating root causes there. But we are at a moment where, you know, the FAA should not be pulled apart at this time. They should be only given more resources to do their jobs.
Jeff, do you feel safe flying right now with your family?
I do feel safe, Nicolle. But I think that this just isn't a good look for the administration. I mean, right now we've had back-to-back major airline commercial accidents, some involving fatalities. And the FAA was already going into this administration shorthanded with controllers, and not just controllers, but thousands of employees needed, engineers, certification engineers, flight standards inspectors that surveil airlines. So why not just keep things in place right now and let these investigations continue before you send shockwaves through the FAA employee workforce, which is only distracting in my view. I'm not saying this is going to significantly decrease safety. I think safety is in good shape, but this isn't going to this can only increase your risk for distractions, for balls falling in between the cracks. So that's my view.
Jeff, can you speak to this function, the people who, quote, create highways in the sky? Explain to us why that's important on a safety front.
So these are charting professionals, right? There's routes in the sky, very similar to the helicopter routes that pass beneath the final approach corridor to runway 33 at Reagan National Airport. Those same routes that the FAA has now wisely temporarily shut down to keep helicopters away from airlines. So those people once those decisions are made of where those routes are, they put it into the routing system so pilots and airmen can immediately access it. The same people are the ones that have renamed Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America and Mount McKinley on aeronautical charts. So that's the staff that we're talking about here.
And what happens when they're taken out of the system, when they no longer work there?
Well, I think there'll be others there, right? They're not taking out the entire office. They're taking out those that have 1 or 2 years of experience in probation with the FAA. Even though they may have a lot of experience elsewhere in the federal government, in that agency, it's less than a year or two. So it's not going to decimate the group. It'll make the others in the group have to work harder and carry a larger workload while being distracted thinking, who's next? That's what I'm curious about. I hope the stops will cut here, or the cuts will stop here. And but if it goes deeper, it's nothing good can happen of that.
Oriana, is there any sense that they're done cutting?
You know, I think it's a question of what's next for the DOGE team, whether or not they're going to be at, you know, FAA headquarters looking for bloat for staff that they feel don't add value to, you know, what the FAA does at the FAA headquarters versus, you know, them going into air traffic control facilities, which they're also doing, and seeing, you know, under the hood of how the air traffic control system works. So whether or not, you know, they find somebody, again, that doesn't add value to either place is meant to be seen, and we could see cuts coming down the line. And that's why I think we've also heard a lot from lawmakers lately who want these answers. I mean, several have sent letters to Secretary Duffy asking him to provide whether or not there was a safety analysis done on the people who were removed and whether or not there are more cuts coming down the pike.
Jeff, is the FAA a bloated agency?
No, they're not a bloated agency. I mean, it's a bureaucracy. Things can move slowly. There maybe 10% is wasteful, but take 90% are working every day and have a passion to keep aviation safe. And it's what is safety critical anyway? I haven't heard that defined. But certainly the FAA is not bloated. In fact, the previous legislation is asking them to get more air traffic controllers, more certification engineers to keep the airplane manufacturers moving, and more flight standards inspectors to keep surveillance of our U.S. airlines. So the opposite of bloated, in my view.
So, Basil, when there's when any of these tragedies transpire, there's extraordinary pressure to reopen the airports because they're so central to how we function, so central to our economic vitality, to the sense that everything's normal after 9/11.
That's right.
I was in the White House, one of the most urgent things that had to be done was to get planes back in the sky. It's sort of a symbol to the world that we were back. And it was viewed as essential to Americans' confidence. How Americans feel about flying is as big a part of this story as whether or not the FAA has any fat in it, which it sounds like the answer is it does not have fat in it.